This week we discussed needs assessments and approaches to measurement. And I wanted to bring to your attention something that's not in your text, but if you do any Googling on needs assessments, you're going to run into the Boric Needs Assessment Model. And when you start to read them, you're like, these look like two very different things, but they're calling it the same. And so I wanted to present this to you. It's not inside of your text, so I'm going to provide some additional resources under this slide presentation. And I have also in your readings one very small article from 1980 from Boric about what this needs assessment model really looks like. I also think, based on some of the research teams that have been proposed, that this is the best model for some of you working in formal education programs where already the program has been developed and now you're actually looking at the gap or the needs that need to be met that may not be being met by that particular program, and I'll explain that as I go along. But for example, in Chapter 5, you're looking at needs assessment. Your authors put out, we're looking at problem analysis for a normative need, an expressed need, a perceived need, and a relative need with identified consequences for that program. In other words, we are looking at these different types of needs, and then we're thinking about what are the consequences of us not doing something here. What does it look like for the future of leadership, or in the case of youth leadership, or at-risk populations? What does it do for an at-risk type of population? We are looking at consequences that hopefully are pretty important because we are dealing with public money. And those have taxpayer and other stakeholder concerns. Of course, if you're a stakeholder, you're paying taxes as well. But they talk about the different ways for data collection and approach to measurement through surveys, resource inventories, service statistics, and public hearings. And so your text does a pretty good job of that. I asked you some questions about it on the GIST quiz. But what they don't discuss, and what will happen if you do kind of a Google search on needs assessments, you're going to run into this Boric Needs Assessment Model. And these are models for training or gap needs assessments, identifying the void that exists between what should be, which we've already established is a program plan. We know what it is. We know the competencies that are we requiring, and what is in an existing program. So I'm going to spend this entire overview lecture, if you will, of needs assessment and a different approach to understanding measurement aside from your text, because I think it lends itself to some of the research team proposals that I've seen where you're looking at some already established programs and you're looking to see what is the need or the gap that's not being addressed in that program. It's actually a bit of a double whack in terms of at the same time you're kind of evaluating and you're identifying the gaps. And just as a side note, 6170 is like part A of a course. This is kind of an entry-level program planning, beginning with the ends in mind for an evaluation. But we're only here together 15 weeks. So we're really focusing on program planning and design with the assessment or the evaluation in mind. 7170, which is a course that will come online next year, will be primarily looking at the evaluation theories and practices, where we're really focused on just the evaluation component of an established program. And again, the Boric model will be re-looked at in that course, but we'll be looking at additional like inferential types of statistics, possibly some regression kinds of models for looking at evaluation. So it's like part B, if you will, or course 2. But today we're going to talk about the Boric Needs Assessment Model, and hopefully it will help some of you as you begin to develop a plan for what you're going to do with assignment 5, which is putting together your program proposal for phase 1, 2, and 3. So just a side note on evaluation research, we are looking here at training or gap needs assessment based on self-report often. And even whether it's the type of model that's presented in the University of Idaho's methods for conducting a needs assessment, which they give you a lot of tools and techniques for looking at those types of research methodologies, or in the Boric example as well, which I'm calling the gap needs assessment. Both are based on self-report unless you do something really different with the instrument involving observation or performance. So the second bullet here, evaluation data can also be collected through observation of what is. And so that's actually looking at the performance or having some sort of instrument that really can give you some idea about not just a person saying I can do this, but actually they can perform, can I do this? And that's actually discussed in the reading. It's a pretty short reading, actually. I'm amazed that Boric could convey somewhat seemingly complex information and a reading that took me less than 15 minutes. And that's the third reading that you have today or this week. Last bullet here, evaluation results aid in decision making for possible changes related to the effectiveness and the efficiency of programs. And so where some people say, what's the difference between evaluation research and research? Well, evaluation research is almost always, I don't like almost always, or probably always, looking at something in terms of the actual object that we have, and we need to make some sort of decision about it. Whereas research might be just conducting it for the base knowledge understanding that will maybe propel itself into a program later for evaluation. And that's the difference. We use a lot of the same methodologies in terms of sample sizes and statistics and descriptive statistics, but it's already a kind of what is. It's already kind of evaluation. We're evaluating something. We're not just doing a research project to determine how does this work, so to speak, but we're looking at a program for saying how does the program actually work. And so that's a little bit of the difference in evaluation. And oftentimes, if you're involved in education or using public money, evaluation where you need to make decisions is really what it's all about. Now there's a web link down here, socialresearchmethods.net evaluation. This is a really useful site if you desperately need to know more about evaluation for something else you're doing in a class right now. But we will use this website extensively in the next course, which will be called 7170. All right, so purpose. The purpose of these evaluations is to make a decision about a training program or priorities. I'm specifically speaking about Boric now, and assess the needs before the training program is designed. So we're really trying to make some decisions here. We're gathering evidence, what evidence exists that our audience needs a training program, and then also what evidence exists that our solutions will yield the positive results. And in fact, his model really goes over that particular aspect, what evidence exists. And he gives some pretty simple formulas. In fact, it's very intuitive when I show you how they work. But really, did we achieve the results between our expectations and the actual level of competence and what our audience can do? And thirdly, what reasons exist for offering training and a development program? In other words, what consequences does it have, just like any other type of needs assessment? So needs assessment, as you're looking and going through assignment 5, phase 1 is the pre-assessment, and that's like overall data gathering information. What is the big picture, taking it from a lot of different sources. The actual assessment, where you probably create a survey or do an interview or a focus group to really hone in and zero in on a topic that you discovered in the pre-assessment. And phase 3 is the post-assessment. In our case, you're going to be developing a plan based on what you found out in phase 2 and developing that plan for implementation. And within that plan is your evaluation plan, how you plan to measure it against your outcomes. Phase 4 then is that plan submission for implementation. And I'm saying that by the time you complete 1 through 3, you would have something you could actually present to stakeholders and or present to a funder to implement your plan. And then, of course, there would be, after whatever amount of time, a year, 2 years, you'd be conducting a full-blown evaluation. So we are in this course going up through phase 3, and we are getting ready. We write it all up for proposal. Obviously, that's the end of 15 weeks, but it's ready to go at that point. All right, so training and development programs. Let me talk a little bit then about Boric. He developed this needs assessment model in the 1980s. In 1980, you'll read that very short reading. It's been then used quite extensively by primarily people in teacher education programs. It's known as the Boric model. It's designed for conducting follow-up studies of pre-service and in-service teacher training programs. But as you do that little reading on his exact model, you can plug in any kind of really training program where you know exactly what the competence is going to be. If you're working in an applied technology center and you know exactly the competence that folks should have by the end of a particular program or a training program of any sort, you can just delete the word pre-service and in-service teachers and just say, you know, follow-up studies of training programs, essentially. Created a control type for quality data, and you'll see how that works out here when you look at a little bit more of the article and the formulas. It yields very understandable data because you're just getting mean weighted scores and you can see how they rank. It's a really fairly simple way to present the data, and it identifies gaps in what should be and what is and what a teacher or trainer should be able to do versus what a trainer can do. And so it's giving you that kind of feedback back into the program, like, oh, they really didn't get this. We thought they were getting this, and this is something that needs to be fixed. So that's one of the reasons I really like this model, is it gives you some direct feedback. It's a dual reporting. It's reporting not just the evaluation of what happened, but it's an evaluation linked to the importance, or the evaluation linked to what was the actual competency that you desired. So this model works best for these established programs. Many of you are looking at, we don't have a program yet. We're really using the program planning. You're really using the text model of phase 1, 2, 3 as discussed. But for those of you who already have that kind of that in place, you could use the Boric model as what you would be putting into your proposal for evaluation for the plan, or for the program that you have. So in the Boric model, we're looking at a list of competencies. You develop what those should be. Stakeholders say, these are the competencies. This is what's required by industry. This is what they need to know, and you can put them into then constructs. Some of them might be constructs related to knowledge. Some might be constructs related to actual performance, and that's explained a little bit more in the reading. But you develop these competencies, and you can categorize them into constructs. Secondly, you develop the survey instrument, most easily accomplished by a questionnaire done in a dual response format. If you don't know what that is, I've put a link underneath the slides here called the dual response surveys. And for those of you who are going to deploy the Boric model, I suggest you read that. And really, it's just a way to collect data simultaneously from two groups. And so you're creating a dual survey response. You're not sending out one and then sending out the second one. So it's actually a nice way to get data collected all at once. Relevance for each competency to the job is a function of importance. So this first level for the survey instrument is current performance or desired performance. And you can have those together if you do it as a dual. Importance that they place on being able to know it. You know, sometimes maybe the leadership puts a much higher importance on it than the people working in the field or actually doing that kind of work, you know, that are involved, the target of the training. They just think, well, that's not very important, but it's quite important to the stakeholders. And then thirdly, the level of attainment of each competency, that's their ability to actually perform that. So we're looking at different knowledge levels up here, and primarily their ability to perform, and it might be through observation, depending on what it is that you're looking for. And there's some good examples in the reading. All right, the Boric model of survey participants then. This is step 3. You're going to do sampling. Here's the way you would conduct a sample. Because it's a training program, it's conducted as a census of all trainees. You don't, if it's a giant group, you could conduct it as a sample, but if it's smaller, it's typically done as a census of all, or as a sample of those trainees based on the size, and of course randomization and all those kinds of things still apply to your survey methodology. In step 4, you calculate the mean weighted discrepancy scores, MWDS, so the mean weighted discrepancy scores. And it gives a pretty simple calculation for this. Basically, you take the discrepancy, and is calculated as the importance that somebody places on it, minus their ability. Keep in mind, self-report unless you are observing, and that gives us a discrepancy score. In other words, there could be a very large score if somebody places a lot of importance on it. Maybe it's a 5, but they rank their ability to do it as a 1. That's a very large discrepancy score. And if you've had a training and there's a large discrepancy score, that means go back to the training. We've got to do something here to make it so that they have a higher ability score, because we're putting such an important mark on it for importance. So the weighted discrepancy score, the WDS now, is calculated for each respondent on each competency. And so now you're grabbing a hold of that particular competency. And to get that mean weighted discrepancy score, you calculate the discrepancy times the mean importance score for each competency, and that'll give you the weighted discrepancy score. All right. Next part, third part, mean weighted. Mean weighted. Now we want an average of everybody. Mean weighted discrepancy score is calculated for each competence as the sum, just like you're figuring an average for anything else, of the weighted discrepancy scores divided by the N. And that will give you each competency, at the end for each competency, like the total number for that, that will give you the mean weighted discrepancy score. And when you have that, you can really see where you are in terms of ranking those competencies. So it's a pretty straightforward way of looking at particular competencies and seeing the gap the need that you have in an inside of an established program. You not only have data collected on what students or your trainees have as perceptions of their abilities, you have also their perceptions of importance, and you're putting that together with what you hopefully are desired or your desired outcomes. So fifth, then you're going to rank the competencies based on the mean weighted discrepancy score, and that's going to be the difference between what the perceived relevance is, the importance, and the attainment, the ability for each competency, and that produces the identifiable gaps, which should be the most formative assessment to say, where is it that I need to go back in this training? If it's a very highly, really important, I have a big score, discrepancy score, where is it I need to have that gap filled? So you're comparing the high priority competencies with the training program content, and then the largest gaps, you receive the majority of training and development effort, and then you match the training and development delivery to the competencies or the needs, and then hopefully you're going to get better results in the end. You revise your program or you revise the competency. Maybe something's really got to be taken, really got to take a look at it. And if, of course, one group is marking something super important and the other group isn't, that's also got to be like discussed and say, okay, why is this not thought to be important? Or why is this thought to be important? 7, revise the program or revise the competency, examine the resources to best address the training and development needs. So when you see the Borich needs model, you are really taking a look at a program that's already existing, and you're trying to find out where the what is and what needs to be gap is. It's one that works really well for established programs. Those of you who are like, we don't know what program to even establish, this is almost the next step, if you will, after you have a program in place. So the Borich, I want to say Borich, but it does say Borich. Borich model summary. It's a systematic process to prioritize competencies. It'll tell you immediately, if you have your group of experts saying these are really important. By the way, that was my master's study, was looking at competencies in the farm equipment and implement industry. That was my master's thesis, and I literally had 150 competencies in that area, and we had all the implement dealers rank them. That was establishing that level. What was the priority competency? And in case you're wondering what that was, the priority was send me somebody who can read, write, and do arithmetic. There's a lot more I can teach them, but that was real important. And then all the other stuff came underneath, but it was a shock and surprise that writing was so high on that particular needs assessment competency level thing. Second bullet, inclusive of stakeholder and participants' input. That's key. It's very inclusive of those two groups. It accurately identifies the gaps that you have, and it allows you to make a decision about them. So I hope this has been useful to you, gives you another tool to think about for those of you who are really wanting to do a needs assessment related to program evaluation, but you already have a program in mind and you need to find out where the gap is between what is and what should be. It's just another tool that we can use in needs assessment and program evaluation. And of course, I've provided additional resources. Everyone in the class is going to read this very 1980s publication from Borich, where you learn about what this model really is, just so you have it in your mind. But for those of you who plan to use it, there's additional resources underneath this presentation, like on dual response, and then Gary Wingenbach's presentation on the Borich model that he uses. He gives specific calculation examples so you can follow the math. And if this is something that you want to use in your program, it's something that's really easy to plug in your figures to and understand and interpret the data. Let me know if you have any questions about this model. You can Google it to learn a little bit more and see other studies that have used this particular model. It is quite well established and very useful for established programs.